say I must have done something real bad to Simeon in a previous life, because he gave me the graveyard shift both days. This is the very last presentation, but I hope you can stay awake for long enough, because it's going to be an interactive presentation. And I'm going to start by saying, are there any accountants in the room? Any accountants? I ask this question every time, and nobody ever puts their hand up. Well, tough is what I'm going to say, because I'm going to spend some time talking about accounting. Okay, so bit of history. When we first built the Mojaloop platform, the accounting, the ledgers, all of that kind of stuff was done by developers. Now, don't get me wrong, developers are great people. They're lovely. I won't hear a word said against them. But they basically just slammed together as many tables as they thought they needed, and then they stuck things in them as they thought they wanted. And it all works fine. Trust me on this. However, we keep getting asked by accounting people like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and central banks and things like that, what's Mojaloop's accounting model? And until quite recently, we had to say, but no longer, because we have instituted a project to develop a proper accounting model for Mojaloop. And I'm here to report to you on progress and to ask for your help in making the accounting model even better than it is now, especially if you're friends with some accountants, because you can show them some things and say, does that make sense? Okay, so our objective then is, first of all, to align the use of ledgers in Mojaloop with current international accounting standards. And second, to represent the things that happen in the Mojaloop switch, the movements of funds between accounts and things like that, in a form that accountants will be able to recognize. And that's what this presentation is about. So I'm going to start with a few fundamental accounting principles, in which case it's good that there aren't the accountants in the room, because now you can be learning some new stuff, which is always useful and interesting. First of all, according to accountants, there's no such thing as negative money. All money is positive. And the only difference between a positive and a negative is that accounts are either assets, which are good things to have, or liabilities, which are bad things to have. And one person's asset is another person's liability. So typically, we are always moving back and forth between assets and liabilities. Second thing, where money's moving, you should credit the source and debit the receiver. Whatever that means. You have to be an accountant to understand that one. Debits rise on the left side, credits rise on the right side. So if I debit an asset account, I increase its value. If I credit a liability account, I increase its value. So effectively, as we've said, liabilities and assets are balancing each other out. So making an asset more negative and making a liability more positive are both increases. And crediting an asset account reduces its value. And the final one is that the assets must equal the liabilities at all times. And that's over the whole set of ledgers. It doesn't say for each individual DFSP or for each individual account, they must all equal each other. It's over the whole thing. So if you sum up everything in the system, it should come to zero. Now, we need to account for a set of things in the Mojaloop system. First of all, we are a pre-funded system, and that means that DFSPs need to provide funds. They don't pay them to us directly, but they give us evidence that they have those funds. And those provide liquidity cover, which is what enables them to trade and what enables them to trade without any risk to the system overall, because the system is always confident that they've got sufficient funds to meet their obligations. then we need to be able to account for reserved funds. Now, when someone says, please execute a payment, what we do is we reserve the liquidity cover equivalent to the amount of that payment. That's to stop people spending it twice. Standard mobile money practice, you'll all recognize it if you've had any experience of how mobile money systems work. We also need to account for obligations. Now, when a payment completes, it creates an obligation between the sending party and the receiving party. The sending party will eventually have to give the receiving party some funds, but it doesn't yet. That's only an obligation at the moment until we do a settlement. And we have to record it, though, and we have to record it in a particular place. And we also need to be able to record settlements. So let's suppose I deposited 20 million Kenyan shillings to cover my thing. I used 5 million of that in my transactions. When I do a settlement, those funds are removed from my deposit, and I now only have 15 million Kenyan shillings available to fund my nefarious activities. And finally, we also need to be able to account for reservations which participants make against their liquidity cover. Now, this is really to cope with what we hope is a historical anomaly. Now, mostly, instant payment systems are settled via RTGS, real-time gross settlement systems, which are operated by the central banks of the jurisdiction. Now, that's great. Unfortunately, typically they only work business hours and they don't work at weekends or public holidays. So if that's the case, we can't do a settlement because there is no RTGS to do the settlement. And that means that in those periods, people need to have more working capital cover, more liquidity cover, than they would if they expected to get their funds back in settlements every day or twice a day or however often. So we allow them to say, I don't want to be moving my stuff in and out all the time, but what I do want to say is, in the normal run of things, of my 20 million Kenyan shillings, only use 6 million to cover transfers. And then when it comes to the weekend, I can say, up that 6 million now, and I'm prepared to go as high as 12 million to cover my transaction activity because I know I won't be able to settle until Monday morning. There are two other things that I want to talk about. First is the net debit cap, and that's what I've just been talking about. It allows a participant to specify how much of their funds can be used for cover. Needed because, as we've said, settlements may be delayed. I'm not going to spend much time on that. The other thing is what I'm calling working capital reduction. Now, there's a small prize for anyone who can think of a better name for this. I'll try and explain what it is, and then you can tell me what you think is a better name for it. So, when a DFSP is a creditor party, when they're the payee, they will eventually receive credit for that payment when the settlement's executed, as we've just said. However, we've also said that this money is pre-funded, so that guarantees that the DFSP will receive the payment. Now, it might be that a scheme will say, you're bound to get that money, so I'll give you credit for it straight away. And what that will do is it will reduce the amount of liquidity cover that a DFSP needs in order to operate. Let's imagine, for instance, that we have a payment system in which there are large urban mobile money systems and small rural credit unions. Now, typically, the credit unions will almost always be the beneficiaries of payments. People will be sending money home. That means that if you have working capital reduction, they are never going to need to deposit any funds because they will always have a balance from from the beneficiary, from being the beneficiaries of payments. So that would make everybody's lives a lot easier, and it would mean that the total amount of working capital in the system, the amount that's tied up and not available for other uses, would be much smaller than it otherwise would be. Right, now let's start thinking about things in accounting terms. So each ledger type has an account, and each participant in the scheme has a sub-account of each of these accounts. Oh, I can't spell. Sorry about that. Now, the accounts are either liabilities or assets, as we've said, but we consider this from the point of view of the scheme, because, for instance, if you think about the funds that are deposited by a DFSP, then so from the point of view of the DFSP, they are their funds, they're an asset. From the point of view of the scheme, they're a liability because eventually the scheme will have to pay those back. So we're always looking at this from the point of view of the scheme. Now let's look at the actual account types. Liabilities are, first of all, the deposit, which represents the funds that a DFSP has committed for liquidity support. And it's a liability because, as I've just said, the Mojaloop scheme eventually will need to repay the funds to the DFSP. Next, we have what we're calling committed funds outgoing. By the way, you can rename any of these account names if you can think of better names for them. Now, this represents obligations from other DFSPs which have been recorded by the switch as part of a payment, i.e., these are payments where this DFSP has been the beneficiary, and they are a liability because eventually the scheme will have to pay that amount in settlement to the DFSP. And then finally, we've got a pre-settlement deposit, and that represents pending obligations which are no longer available to fund payments, and essentially they are cancelling assets which the Mojaloop scheme had previously had available for use. Effectively, what's happening is when, well, you'll see, actually, I won't talk about this now. We'll talk about it when we come to look at the actual process. Looking at assets, first of all, we've got unrestricted funds. Now, these are the funds that we record as being the funds that a DFSP can use to support its activity in the transfer market. So these are the funds that it uses as cover for the payments that it makes where it is the debtor. DFSP can get those back at any time, and it's an asset because the Mojaloop scheme can use them to make itself work properly. Second, we've got restricted funds, and these are the funds, remember we were talking about the net debit cap? Funds that are not available because the DFSP has said, I know they've got them in the deposit, but you're not allowed to use them, are put in the restricted funds account. Again, it's an asset because in principle, the Mojaloop scheme could use them. And one of the things that you can do, for instance, is you can move restricted funds into unrestricted funds if you're a DFSP. Then we have reserved funds, and they are funds associated with payments in flight. So liquidity cover, which is committed because the payment has arrived, the payment execution request has arrived at the switch, and the liquidity check has been done, so they can't be spent again. But on the other hand, they are not a liability, they're not a benefit to anybody else in the scheme because the scheme is not yet completed, so we put them in a reserved fund. Then we have committed funds incoming. Those are the opposite of the committed funds outgoing. So these are funds where the DFSP is the payer, the debtor, and they are an asset because that's money that we now won't have to pay to the DFSP. The DFSP has given it to us, and we're going to use it to fund the beneficiary payments. And then we have a pre-settlement draw. Hello? So that's where a working capital reduction is enabled, and therefore DFSPs get immediate credit for funds And this is the account from which that credit is taken. So effectively, this account is credited and the unrestricted funds are debited. Okay, so that covers the accounts. Now I want to look at how that actually works in terms of the steps of a payment. So, first of all, we're looking at registering liquidity card. The DFSP provides funds, or evidence that it has funds, to be used as cover for its payment activities in the system. In this example, the DFSP deposits £1,000 and it has a net debit cap of £750. So the deposit account is increased by the amount provided. The unrestricted funds account is decreased, but it's a liability, it's an asset, so that's a good thing, by the amount of the NDC, or if there is no NDC, by the whole amount. And the restricted funds account get the balance of the deposit. So as you can see here, there's a debit from the unrestricted funds account, so those funds are now available, and a corresponding credit to the deposit, and a similar credit of 250, which is the balance of the deposit over and above the net debit cap, which goes into the restricted funds account, and you will see two entries in the ledgers, one for the unrestricted funds and one for the restricted funds, for a total deposit of 1,000 clams. Next up, we prepare a payment. We do the liquidity check. Switch checks that the payer DFSP has got funds on deposit, and if it has, the reserved funds account is debited by the amount of the proposed payment, and the unrestricted funds account is credited with the amount. So the asset is essentially moved from the unrestricted funds account to the reserved funds account. And if doing that would mean that the unrestricted funds account went positive, then the payment will be rejected. Okay? Completing a payment becomes much more complicated. So, the first thing that happens is we move the funds out of the reserved funds account because they are no longer reserved, the payment has been confirmed. And we increase the pre-settlement deposit account by the amount of the payment. Okay? And now this is the only ledger movement which goes between two, actually it's not completely true, but mostly it's true. The only one that goes between two parties. One of the things you'll have noticed now is that in this accounting model, almost all of the movements are within a single party. Very few of them are cross-party movements, but this one is. So the committed funds outgoing account is debited because now I'm going to have to pay less to the sending DFSP, and the committed funds incoming account is credited because now I'm going to have to pay more to the payee DFSP. Now, if working capital reduction is enabled, then we have a bit more to do. So, first of all, we move funds out of the committed funds outgoing account and move the payers and credit that against the payer's pre-settlement account. So effectively this is saying this is no longer something that you are going to get in your unreserved funds as a consequence of settlement. And then we debit the unrestricted funds for the payee DFSP and credit the pre-settlement draw account to say, effectively, we, the switch, are making a loan to the payee DFSP of the amount of the payment. So you can use that immediately to fund your transfer activity. Now, settling. So if the participant owes funds as part of the settlement, then the committed funds incoming account is credited by the amount they owe, and their deposit account is debited by the amount they owe. So what's happening there is, let's suppose that we had 10,000 in the deposit account originally. The payer, DFSP, made a payment of 100 clams. In settlement, that 100 will be taken off and there will only be 900 in their deposit account. And the amount that they owe will be wiped off from their committed funds incoming account. Now, if the participant doesn't have working capital reduction enabled, they will only get credit at the point of settlement. So now we need to adjust the unrestricted funds account because we've given them some funds in the course of settlement. So the deposit account is credited with the funds, and the committed funds outgoing account is debited. So that says, now I've got more in my deposit account because it's been settled. But also, the pre-settlement deposit is credited and the unrestricted funds is debited because now I can use those funds, the funds I got in settlement, to fund my transfers. Now, I could not do that if I'd already got the use of those funds earlier on because working capital reduction was enabled. So if the participant already has working capital reduction enabled, they will already have liquidity cover for the transfers, but they haven't got credit in the deposit account. So the scheme needs to credit their deposit account and clear the loan that we talked about earlier that was made via the pre-settlement draw account. So what we do is we debit the pre-settlement draw, which we credited before, and credit the deposit account to say, you have those funds. Okay? So, does that all make sense? Does any of that make sense? Does anyone have any questions? Any of you ever seen a film called The Princess Bride? Yeah, it's a lovely film, isn't it? It's a great film. But there's a moment in it when one of the characters says, there are 3 things that you should never do. The first thing is start a land war in Asia. The second thing is do a live demonstration as part of a presentation. Unfortunately, I didn't see that film until after I decided that I was going to do a live demonstration as part of this. So, fingers crossed, buckle up, we will see what happens. So that bit worked all right. So now we have you seeing that? No, you're not seeing that. No. I bet what's happening is that while I've been happily thinking that you're showing what's happening on this screen, you've actually been showing what's been happening on your stored version of this presentation. And now, we're in trouble. Sorry, question. That's very good. Make it a long question. That gives them plenty of time to fix everything.
Well, I would like to know, are there mechanisms to roll back transaction? And in which case, how does it affect the ledgers?
Sorry, what kind of transaction?
To roll back a transaction.
Yeah. That in exactly the same way, except the parties are reversed.
Okay.
So the movement the movement of the transaction is exactly the same, but the party that originally was the debit party is now the credit party, and the party that originally was the credit party is now the debit party. So it doesn't look any different in terms of the movements in the ledgers.
Okay.
Lewis.
Thank you, Michael. I was lucky enough to have a sneak preview of this. So my question is, what the default that we have today is WCR, working capital reduction,
Yes.
turned on
Yep.
in Mojaloop. So the idea is if a DFSP is a net receiver of funds, they can use that as credit against the transactions. When is a situation where you wouldn't want working capital reduction to be turned on? So and the motivation behind this question is the fact that we're adding new business logic while also introducing a new accounting model, which seems
I
like
am bound to say that I struggle to think. So Miller is the person who likes the idea of not having working capital reduction.
He's not in the
Sad
room,
to
so
say he's
maybe we can pull it out.
he's scuttled off and is
Okay.
not present before us today. His view is that a regulator might say, it's all very well saying you're necessarily going to get that credit for transfers, but there might be things that stop that happening. And therefore, if you can settle pretty regularly, pretty frequently, you might say, well, we're just going to make people wait for their money until we're absolutely sure that we've done the...
So like in the gross settlement
Yeah, exactly. The closer you move,
then you
as you know, one of the things that we want to do in Mojaloop, one of our long-term projects, is being able to reduce the amount of time between settlements, eventually to a point at which we'll be doing real-time gross settlement ourselves, and transfers will be settled immediately they are completed. That's our aspiration, but we're quite a long way from that at the moment.
I have another question in case your thing's not working.
It's okay, we still haven't,
Okay.
we still haven't gone anywhere.
I think, correct, and I think maybe this is somewhere we disagree. Why should the funds, when you're depositing funds, go straight into unrestricted? Because I feel like they would be better off going into restricted and then having another step to then unrestrict those funds.
Could do it that way, yeah. I mean, I think that it would work in the same way if that were the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not
There's
necessarily beholden to that.
No obvious reason for doing it like that.
Because it was just a thought of like, if there is another deposit or some kind of business logic, business action that takes place.
No,
and then the net debit gets set after that, but that call fails for whatever reason.
I guess the only reason for doing it in the way we do it is to say the funds that should not be in the unrestricted funds account never will be there.
Sorry, can you say that again?
I will say it again. I'll try and say it the same again.
Yeah.
What we're saying is the funds that should not be in the unrestricted funds account, that is, funds in excess of the net debit cap, never will be in that account. It will not be the case that they go into the account and then go out again. They never go into it.
Yes. So in the example, my name is Leo, software engineer. In the example you've given us, it doesn't include the fees charged for a transaction.
No.
Yes. So in the scenario where we have fees for a transaction, are the fees part of that amount, or do we again have to reserve the potential fees for that transaction? And how do you handle that?
That depends on which fees you're talking. Sorry.
Okay.
That depends on which fees you're talking about. If in the scheme removes fees from a payment in order, for instance, to pay interchange fees or hub fees, then those will require new accounts to be created to hold them. And one of the things that will happen is there will be a movement from one of the accounts into the fees account. Most people, I think, who have implemented Mojaloop so far have done fees in a different way so that they are not immediately taken. So we can extend the accounting model to include interchange fees or hub fees that are taken as part of the payment process. Alternatively, as I say, most actual implementations that I know of, they do that separately, either by keeping a record of the amount of transactions that a DFSP has done, or by having a standard subscription, and by billing for that separately. So both of those are available options. But this is the core accounting model, and you're absolutely right to say it does not include the extensions that would be required if you wanted to take fees directly from the funds in the system. So for instance, one of the things you could do is you could say, let's suppose you have a charge of 10 Kenyan shillings for each transaction. Each time a transaction completes, you simply move funds from the party's unrestricted funds account to a interchange fees or hub fees account. This is a Mojaloop Accounting simulator. It implements the account movements that we've just been looking at. So what I'm going to do, which I thought was going to be the dangerous part, but it turns out we already went, well, maybe there's a more dangerous part coming up. But in principle, I thought I would show you exactly how all of this works in terms of ledger movements. So we have a little simulator there. And, oh, actually, I should have, let me get rid of that for the moment and say, we have the set of accounts here. Oh, gonna have to make those bigger too. Those are the ones we've talked about, so they shouldn't be a surprise. We have the various actions. Again, we've talked about those, so they shouldn't be a surprise. We have a sheet that contains participants, and you can have as many participants, well, I don't know if you have as many as you like, but you can certainly vary the amount of participants. You can set a net debit cap, you can set whether working capital reduction is enabled or not. We have a journal, which you will see populated with changes to the various ledgers. And we have a general ledger, which is giving us our overall accounting picture of everything that's happening in the system. We've got a little thing over the bottom that says settlement batches. That's there essentially just to record things in the system, so it makes life easier. I'm going to make that a bit bigger so you can see it more easily. And now I'm going to go back to here and fire up the simulator. Now, there's a little thing that says batch size there. I'm going to make that smaller so we can see an actual settlement. And down here, we can see all of the actions that are supported. So I'm going to start off by depositing funds for participant A. I'm going to deposit 1,000 clams, and I'm going to press the deposit button, fingers crossed. Right, so now we can see that it's looked at participant A and has recognized that it's got a net debit cap of 750. So it will credit that to support payments. The rest will be reserved. We can go to the next step, which said it's recorded the deposit of available funds and it's given a GUID. And now, if we see the general ledger, we will see that the deposit for participant A is 750, and the unrestricted funds for participant A are minus 750. We can go the rest of it. And now we see that the deposit is 1,000. 750 of that is in the unrestricted funds, and 250 is in the restricted funds. Does that all make sense? Yeah? Okay. Now I've got a little thing here that says you can skip the individual steps, so I'll just add some more funds to everybody. So everybody's now got 1,000 clams. The only thing to notice here is that participant C doesn't have a net debit cap. So if we look down here at the unrestricted funds for participant C, we will see that they got the full amount of the deposit because there is no net debit cap. Okay, so now everybody's got 1,000, so there's 3,000 clams overall in the system. Liabilities are 3,000. Oh, thank goodness for that. Assets are also 3,000. Okay, so now I'm going to turn off skip the individual steps, and we're going to make a payment. Oh, sorry, the other thing I will do is we'll just have a quick look at the journal, and you can see that it started to build up statements about everything it did in the various accounts. So let's try making a payment. So we'll make a payment from participant A to participant B, and we're going to make it 100 clams. Okay, so we go pay. First thing that happens is it reserves the funds. And you can see there, you got a movement from reserved funds to unrestricted funds, and we can see that also happening in the general ledger. There. Okay, and that is now 650 rather than 750. Next step. It's cleared the reservation. So now the reserved funds for participant A is back to 0. And that 100 clams is... Oh, that's right, it's gone into the pre-settlement account there. Next step, we record the obligations. So now committed funds outgoing for participant B are 100, and committed funds incoming for participant A are also 100. So they balance each other. So now we go to the next step. So it's moved the funds. So because participant B has working capital reduction enabled, it's going to move the funds to the pre-settlement account and make them available to the beneficiary. So we can now see that participant B, who did have 600 clams of available funds, 500, now has 600. Okay? And that is that. The action is complete. I'm going to turn those off again. I notice we're running out of time fast, but I might take a bit of extra time. So we'll do a similar payment from B to C, and a similar payment from C to A. And now we should have enough to do a settlement. You'll notice that everything is still balancing, 3,000 in the assets, 3,000 in the liabilities. So now we're going to go through a settlement. We should find there's a settlement batch. Yeah, there is. So we are going to initiate the settlement, and now we are going to settle. Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn off the individual things. However, not sure that things have quite worked there. It should be 3,000, but I'll get back to you on that one. So, this was working, I promise. I will get back to you and I will send out a revised version. See, this is why they say never do a live demo. But I wouldn't be told. And now I am covered in shame. I stand before you, a broken man. Anyway, time is up. Does anyone have any questions? Hina. Oh, sorry. Hina, then Julie.
Thank you for the session, Michael, and apologies if you had already covered it because I joined a bit late. The transaction is happening in 2 steps because of the involvement of multiple accounts. How are you ensuring atomicity? What if something goes wrong in the first step and the transactions and basically the positions don't reconcile?
Okay, so my answer is, if you cast your eye on that gentleman over there, who is the master of the ledgers from the development stand, he has devised a cunning plan that says all of these form part of a single transaction and either all of them succeed or none of them do.
Yes.
So although we've split them out for the purposes of the simulator, in normal operation, as I say, they'll all be wrapped into a single transaction and either everything will succeed or nothing will succeed.
Okay. So you're saying that if at any step something goes wrong, you just roll back all of the operations,
Absolutely.
the debits and credits, right? You roll back to 0 then.
That's right.
Okay.
Julie?
In terms of balance check, when a transaction is initiated, which account balance do you check to...
You mean the liquidity check?
Yes.
Yeah. So that is, we check the balance in the unrestricted funds. So if the amount of the transaction exceeds the balance in the unrestricted funds, then the transfer fails.
Okay. Okay, so then I understood the model. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a couple more. Sorry, sorry. I know I've got too many questions for you.
No,
but it's cool to have this in the bigger form as well, so it's not so other people can hear our thinking out loud, maybe, or I don't know. So one question is around with working capital reduction turned on when a DFSP is a net receiver of funds. And their restricted funds is already at the net debit cap. There needs to be some sort of method for sweeping the funds that exceed what the net debit cap are. And I'm guessing that then should go into unrestricted funds. Is that
They
right?
do, and that's not in the simulator at the moment.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
But it will be to do with something that means we can set the account cannot be positive flag on that account. So we should find that it fails, and we can then go back and move funds into the unrestricted funds account instead.
You mean restricted?
Into the restricted funds account instead.
And then in terms of just the language around the net debit cap, I wonder if we can revise that or improve upon it. So when we say no net debit cap, that could either mean that the net debit cap is 0, therefore I can't spend anything, or the net debit cap is infinity, and I can spend everything. The brain of me, the part of my brain which likes to just use integers, would prefer that we say like an infinite net debit cap or uncapped. You know, it is an uncapped net. I don't know, uncapped net debit cap, or a 0 net debit cap, or a net debit cap of 50,000, or because I find saying no net debit cap is kind of a little vague. I don't know what you think of that.
I'm happy to be guided by you, is what I say.
Okay.
Now, the only other thing I'm thinking is that Muta promised to ask a question, but he hasn't. Perhaps that's because he's gone. Oh, yeah, he might have done. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes?
Apart from a transaction, ledgers, entries made from a transaction, are there any other ways of adding entries?
Any other ways of?
Adding entries apart from entries that are coming from a transaction. For example...
Well, there are various kinds of operations. So you can deposit funds, you can withdraw funds, you can move funds from restricted to unrestricted or vice versa. You can do transactions, do transfers, you can do settlements. Apart from that, and as we've said, you might want to extend the model if you were going to take fees as part of the transaction. But apart from that, there should not be any changes to the account, to the ledgers. It should not be possible to change the ledgers except via one or other of those actions. Any other questions? In that case, thank you very much.